Welcome back to the second part of our three-part series of how to learn another language. And in this segment, this episode, we're going to talk about what research has shown about learning other languages, learning a new language. And so I'm going to start with an example from Hungarian, pcia. In English, this means dog. Now, in school, in maybe language classes that you've taken with textbooks and things like this, you may have had a lesson, and then it has maybe like a list of vocabulary that you're supposed to learn for the lesson. It may be in a list. You may have tried to learn, words using flashcards like this, where you have the word that you want to learn on one side, and then the English word or the word in your language on the other side. There are some problems with this approach. So first of all, if you're trying to learn a word and then learn its translation, we run into problems immediately when because it's a very weak link between these these two words. This link can be broken or short-circuited if you're nervous, or it's very easy to forget. It's very tenuous. This is a problem that people often have, right? They can't remember, they've studied with flashcards and studied, lists of words, but then when it comes time to use the word, they can't remember it, right? Probably all of us have experienced this, and it's, it can be very frustrating. So the problem with this is that there has been research done that has used something that's called a functional MRI, where they look at your brain while you're doing an activity. And one of the activities that they looked at was this kind of flashcard activity, where people looked at one word in that they were supposed to learn in Korean. So then they had the Korean word on one side and the Japanese word on the other side, and they tried to learn this list of words. And as you can see, there are some areas of activity in the brain. There are a lot of areas that are not very active. Now, as opposed to this, where they're using flashcards, there was another way that they had people learn words, and that way was that they showed people clips of movies and TV shows where the word was being used in the context of this story of the TV show or the movie or whatever. And so, for instance, one of the examples I think was the Japanese word and the Korean word for help me, tasukete. And then the people that watched the video, it was a video of kind of different situations where that word was just being used, like maybe where somebody tries to attack a woman and she says, "Tasukete, help me." What do you think happened to the brain of those people? Well, let's have a look at that. So basically, you can see that there are just like fireworks going off in the brains of the people that were learning these words in the context of a story or a meaningful situation. This is very important, because what this means is that there are networks of the neurons, the cells are forming networks between each other in very complex ways. And this means that the thing that is being learned or being encoded into the brain is going to be much stronger and much more durable, right? Not just that tenuous link between the two words, but something much more much stronger, much more robust, we say. Something that it will last much longer and that will be much easier to recall because there are so many different parts of the brain that are being involved and interconnected. In the case of learning a language, we have these neurons in our brain, right? The brain cells. And what we need to do in order to learn the language is we need to get these brain cells to build a network to connect with each other, to help us to learn those words and the contexts, the situations that the words would be used in, so that when we're in those situations, the words will just come to us because they're part of this network. It's all interconnected. And so this is what we need to do is increase and build these connections between the neurons. So how do we do that? That's the question, right? Is how do we do that? Well, it's not going to be flashcards, as we've already seen. It's flashcards alone, probably will not do too much for us. It turns out that this is very much like gardening. So if any of you have grown plants, you know that you plant the seed and then you give the seed water and nourishment, and then it will grow, right? And that's the same thing for the cells in our brains. The neurons, these connections, they need to grow. It's a physical process, a biological process of growth and interconnection. And so we need to give, these cells the nourishment, so to speak, the stimulation that they need to help them grow. So what is that? What we need to do is we need to give the cells stimulation of having the language in a form that we can understand, so that it's not just noise. It won't do us any good to listen or read the language and not understand it. We have to be able to understand it so that it's not just noise. And as we take that stimulus in through our eyes and ears, then this stimulates the brain to start making connections, right? The connections between the meanings that we understood and the new, maybe the new words and the things, these things start to connect with each other. And this is a process, right? That takes time. And if you quit giving the brain the nourishment or the stimulation that it needs, then it's not going to grow. These connections will not grow. If you don't give it enough of what it needs, then they won't grow. Just like a plant won't grow if you don't water the plant. So this is very important, that we get enough of the language that we understand. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. But that's what's going to help our brains to acquire the language, to develop the language, to grow the language in our brains. And so this is like, again, taking Hungarian for our example here. We have again the word kutya, which means dog, but here we don't have it, on a flashcard with the English word dog. Rather, we have all of these different experiences and, emotional attachments and, maybe scary experiences, things that we've seen and, have experienced in life through things that we've heard. And all of these things become a network that is connected to the word kutya. And so it's become something that is very, very, very useful to us when we want to remember the word. It's there because it's connected with so many different parts. And look at how often, the word comes up in this network, right? We have words for dog and all of these different forms for all of these different, situations. And so it's not just like one word with the English translation, right? It's something very complex and interconnected. And that is what we need to aim for in order to really gain an ability with the language. And that means that we need to listen and we need to read in the language. That's the stimulation. That's like watering the plant. If we don't have that, then this kind of network is not going to grow. The neurons, the connections in our brains will not develop in the way that they need to. So again, this is, compared to this, this kind of a situation is much more desirable for us as language learners. So the problem that we have in school often is what I would like to talk about now. Now, this is what we're looking at now is kind of a graph that represents first language acquisition. And so when babies are born, at first, when they're just born, they don't say anything. And then after a few months, they begin to babble and kind of maybe imitate some of the sounds that mom and dad or brothers and sisters or whoever makes. And then once they get to be about 1 year old, they begin to produce some single word utterances. They begin to say some single word things. And then somewhere along in between 1 and 2 years, they begin to put 2 words together to form a very kind of a simple, like not quite maybe what we would think of as a sentence, but like two words that are related, like I eat, I want, mommy go, mommy come, something like that. And then after another year or so, they get to be about 3 years old, and they begin to use some short sentences of more words. And as they go along, they begin to produce more complex sentences. When around 5, they begin to really start using conjunctions, right, like and but, and make more complicated utterances. And then as they get to be 7 and up to 12, this begins to improve more and more, but you can see that it really tapers off. We have a huge amount of growth, and then it begins to slow down because it gets closer and closer, and there are just very kind of fine tuning that needs to happen there. But you can see it takes years for children. Often we think that children are so quick at learning languages, but actually it takes them years, and it's a process. Now, for us, as people that want to learn languages beyond our first language, the problem that we have with school, with learning in kind of a lot of educational systems, is that often when we go to class, we all of a sudden we try to start from memorize phrases and start saying sentences, probably somewhere in between the short sentences of a 3-year-old and more complex sentences. This is a problem because we are completely lacking this foundation that native speaking children have before they begin, before they start to really produce sentences. So why is this a problem? Okay, let's talk about that a little bit. So let's compare this to 2 rocks. Okay, so this is the ground, and we have kind of 2 rocks that are sticking out of the ground. These 2 rocks, we can think of it as production in the language and then understanding. You can see this rock here is kind of like what we do in school. Like we learn a lot of phrases and a lot of things we practice so that we can produce the language, so that we can say some things. But we don't really understand the language. right? We don't really have a base of understanding. We can say some things that we've memorized, but we don't really have the language inside of us. Now, children, on the other hand, by the time a child is 3 years old, they will have listened to somewhere around 10,000 hours of their language, right? So every day they're hearing the language. This is before they even really start to produce sentences. They're listening for years. This is not something that we do in school, right? We go to school and all of a sudden we're practicing saying phrases without understanding. So this is a really a big problem for us because let's say, so you're talking with a native speaker, and if you don't understand what the native speaker has said to you, then you can't respond, right? Or if you do respond, it's going to probably be like, not going to make much sense. It's not going to connect with what the person has said. So then what's going to happen, right? If you don't know what the person is saying, then the conversation ends there, right? Probably, or it's going to be very uncomfortable. If you have learned some phrases to say, you might try saying those phrases. But again, if you don't understand what the person has said to you, then it's not going to work too well for you to kind of spit out the phrases that you've learned. Chances are very low that it's going to really kind of mesh with what the person is trying to talk about. Now, on the other hand, okay, if you're talking with somebody and you have put in the time like a child has, you've listened to the language, you've developed a really good understanding, you can hear it and understand it, even if you can't say very much yet, right? You still, you can't say a whole lot, you're not very skilled at speaking yet, just like, a 3-year-old child or a 5-year-old child even may not be very skilled at speaking, but they can understand. And what does that mean? What will happen then? So even if you just say something, if you can respond in a very simple way, okay, so you understand and you're like, okay, here's my response. It's very simple, but it relates to what the person has said. You have understood what the person has said, and so your response is relevant. What's going to happen then? The person is going to say, oh, okay, this person understood me, so I'll say some more things. And because you can understand the language, again, you understand what the person said, and then what's going to happen then? Well, you're going to be able to respond again. And so this means that you can really communicate. This is knowing the language. This is what it means to be able to really know the language and communicate. And so this is what we want to aim for. Again, this means that we have to prioritize listening and reading and not speaking. Practice speaking is not going to do too much for us because we're just going to, if we do that, we're just going to memorize phrases and we're not really going to understand. So the first thing that we want to prioritize is listening and getting to understand the language passively, you might say. So there's what I like to call the acquisition cycle. Okay, the first part of this cycle is that we have input, which again, this is listening and reading a lot. And we're going to talk about some of these activities that we're going to look at in the next part of this series. And then finding out. Okay, so if you had something that you didn't understand, you're going to find out what it meant. And it's kind of a cycle between these two things. And so the first part of what we want to do and really prioritize and focus on is getting input. This is the stimulation, again, that will stimulate our brain so that it will begin to grow the language inside of our brain through listening and reading. This is what we need to do. And again, we need to understand that so that it's not just noise or words on a page. And that's why we have this find out component. So we're kind of cycling back and forth between these two things. So, students often say, well, what about speaking then? You said, that you don't need to worry about speaking at first, or, that you don't have to practice speaking. Well, eventually you're going to want to do some things that will help you to become more confident in using the language fluently. There's kind of an aspect of training the muscles in your mouth to make the new sounds and of the language and things like that. But that's really not such a big deal. The big deal is that you want to be able to have a solid understanding. And if you have that solid understanding, when it comes time to produce the language, you're going to be able to do that with confidence, because you know what the person has said and you know what to say, because you have that in your brain. Sometimes I like to compare it to glasses of water. And research on how we learn vocabulary has shown that usually if we encounter a word, each time we encounter the word, we may only learn or gain maybe 5% of that word. And each time we encounter the word, we're going to encounter it multiple times. And each time we do that, we get a little bit more of the word each time. So to give a more concrete example in English, so that everybody can understand this. So for instance, if we have the word discussion in English, and the first time we hear that, maybe we hear it, and then the next time we encounter the word, somebody says discussion, and we're like, it seems like I've heard that word before. First of all, it starts to be familiar, right? We don't know what it means. We're not really confident in the way that the word sounds, but when we hear it, it's like, I think I've heard that word before. So that's like that first 5% has stayed with us. And then next time when we hear the word again, then we're going to be more sure, I know I've heard that word before. And you might find out what the word means then either from the context or from you might look it up or something like that, and probably you'll forget that. But through the process of doing this, each time you encounter the word, it's going to become more and more, it's going to become larger and larger to you. And then what will happen is that when you get to the point, okay, so you're filling up your glass, when you get to the point where your glass is overflowing, right? You know the word so well, you've encountered it so many times, you know it so well that it's there. Then when you go to speak, you don't have to try to remember the word. You don't have to even think about what you're going to say. Just like in your native language, it just comes out usually, right? There may be some times that you have to think carefully about maybe the wording that you want to use in some situations, but mainly it's an automatic process. And this is how that happens, is that you become so well acquainted with the word that it is just part of you. And once you get to that point, then you're going to start speaking. Okay. Still, you will have errors. Still, you will make mistakes. Once you get to this point, though, like where you've really are starting to recognize the word and feel comfortable with it, that you know the word, you can recognize it reliably, you know what it means, then at that point you can start doing what I like to call activation activities, okay? And we'll talk about some of these in detail in the next installment of this series, of all of these, the input, the find out, and the activate parts of the acquisition cycle. But these things will help you to start speaking and improving, your confidence and ability to do that. So again, we'll talk about that next time. So that brings us to the end of this second part of the series. I hope that you've enjoyed it. The next part is kind of like the maybe the funnest part. I don't know if you've had fun so far. I hope that you have. But the next part is where we're going to talk about actual examples of what you can do, some kind of tips or advice about actual activities and things that you can do that will help you to acquire the language based on this research and this understanding, this knowledge of how languages are learned that we've talked about this time. So I hope to see you in the next and final installment.